Picture it. 79 years old. 43 years spent tending to other people's bodies in hospital corridors. And through the bedroom wall, your son's wife calls you a liability. That's the word she chose. Liability. Agnes Wren, discarded from her own family's home like a woman who'd outlived her usefulness. Given 14 days to disappear. Affordable housing? Non-existent. So she did the one thing left. She showed up at a county impound auction and placed a bid on lot 14, a rusted shipping container sealed shut for 11 years, abandoned by whoever once owned it. The price? $3. But when Agnes finally broke through that corroded padlock, she didn't find scrap metal and dead air. She found a space that had been someone's world. A hidden place that held the answer to a question lodged in her chest since she was 7 years old. Why did my mother leave? But before that container, the eviction, because you need to understand the path, how a woman with nearly half a century of nursing behind her ended up gripping bolt cutters at a county lot. It wasn't her son. Keith worked at the post office, called every Sunday at 4 in the afternoon without fail. Keith loved his mother with everything he had. Keith also couldn't stand up to his own wife. Brenda said in the kitchen, loud enough to carry through drywall, Keith tried, that last word did the damage. My house. Brenda had inherited it. Keith occupied it. Agnes slept in the back bedroom. On paper, Brenda had a point. On every other level, it was a woman peeling her husband's mother out of the home the way you strip wallpaper that no longer suits your taste. Keith came to Agnes's room afterward, held her hand. Quote 3. Quote 4. Quote 5. No anger in her voice, just the deep, worn sadness of a woman who'd raised a gentle man and watched him marry a sharp one. 2 weeks. She called every affordable housing number she could find. Wait lists everywhere. 6 months minimum. Social Security paid $1,340 a month. The cheapest apartment she found cost $1,100. Then somebody at church mentioned the county auction. Tap like if you've ever made a choice that looked completely insane to everyone except the person making it. Because what comes next changes everything Agnes believed about her own life. The container she bought for shelter, someone had already turned it into a shelter. And that someone was a woman Agnes had spent 72 years convinced had simply walked out the door and never looked back. The container sat behind chain-link fencing at the edge of town in the county impound lot. Agnes drove there in a borrowed church truck, a 2006 Ford that reeked of communion wine and brake fluid. The container was worse than she'd pictured. Rust ate 3 of its 4 sides. The double doors at one end were sealed by a padlock so corroded it had bonded with the latch itself. The county inventory tag was barely readable. Lot 14, seized 2015. Origin unknown. Status abandoned. Origin unknown. A container with no history. As if it had appeared from nowhere and simply waited here ever since, patient, quiet, for a woman with $3 and no options left. Agnes grabbed the bolt cutters she'd taken from the church maintenance closet, clamped them around the fused padlock, squeezed. Her arms trembled. 79 years old and still strong, but bolt cutters don't respect resilience, they respect grip strength. The lock gave way with a crack. She hauled the doors apart. Hinges shrieked, metal grinding against metal, like the container resented being disturbed after all these years. Daylight flooded the interior. Agnes forgot to breathe. It wasn't empty. The space was arranged. Not thrown together, not dumped. Deliberately, carefully arranged. Along the left wall, a workbench, its surface scarred and stained from years of use, with a cast iron device bolted firmly to its top. Along the right wall, metal shelving fixed directly to the container's ribs, holding cardboard boxes labeled in handwriting Agnes couldn't make out from the doorway. At the far end, a folded cot, a small table, a single chair, a kerosene lamp, its glass chimney blackened with old soot. And there in the center, draped under a canvas tarp gone rigid with age, a shape. Large, mechanical. Agnes pulled the tarp free. A sewing machine. Not some modern plastic thing, an industrial singer, black enamel and gold lettering, the kind that weighed 80 pounds and punched through leather without flinching. The needle was still threaded, the tension dial still set, the foot pedal cast iron. A treadle that needed no electricity rested on the floor as though waiting for someone's shoe. Agnes laid her hand on the machine, cold metal beneath her palm. Dust blanketed everything, but when she turned the wheel by hand, the mechanism responded, smooth, oiled, kept alive by someone who knew that machines survive when somebody loves them enough to maintain them. She reached for the shelving, pulled down a box. Inside, fabric. Folded with care, wrapped in tissue paper so old it disintegrated under her fingers. Cotton prints from a forgotten time. Florals, plaids, ginghams. The kind of patterns Agnes hadn't laid eyes on since childhood, since her hands went still. She recognized the floral immediately. Blue flowers against white. A tiny repeating pattern nearly invisible unless you brought it close to your face. Her mother had worn a dress cut from that exact cloth. Agnes remembered it. Not sharply, not the way adults remember things, the way children do. As texture, as smell, as the sensation of pressing your face into someone's hip and breathing in laundry soap and sun-warmed cotton. Agnes's mother, Iris, who had left in 1953, who had walked out of the house on a Tuesday morning when Agnes was 7 years old. No note, no phone call, no word of any kind. Agnes's father had said 3 words, "She's gone," and the subject sealed itself shut with the permanence of a coffin lid. Agnes had carried that story for 72 years. Her mother abandoned her. That was the truth she lived inside. And now she stood in a shipping container, gripping fabric printed with a pattern she hadn't seen since 1953. Her legs failed. She sank onto the cot, the folding cot someone had slept on, and pressed the cloth against her face and breathed in. Nothing. Dust. Age. And the faintest ghost of something that could have been laundry soap if she willed it hard enough. She didn't weep. Not yet. Weeping demanded comprehension, and comprehension hadn't caught up. She opened the next box. More fabric, different patterns, some already cut into shapes, pattern pieces pinned together, ready for the needle. Children's garments, small, sized for bodies still growing. The box after that, finished clothes, dresses, shirts, trousers, dozens of them, folded and stacked with the exactness of a person who took fierce pride in work nobody noticed. Every piece had a tag stitched into the collar. Not a brand, a handwritten label in red thread. Made for, and then a name. The blank filled in differently each time. Different names. But the same hand behind every letter. Made for Alice Hearn, made for the Briggs children, made for Tommy Watts. Agnes knew those names. Hearn, Briggs, Watts. Town families, old families. The kind whose names appeared on cemetery headstones and church donation plaques, and the weathered awning of the hardware store that had been a hardware store since before Agnes drew her first breath. Then, a ledger. Hardbound, water-damaged, swollen with entries. She cracked it open. The penmanship was exact, small, slanting left, the kind of handwriting drilled into students at schools that no longer exist. Every entry followed the same structure: date, name, garment, payment. October 3rd, 1953, Alice Hearn.
Winter coat, wool, children's size 6. 2 dozen eggs, October 11th, 1953. Briggs family. 3 school shirts, cotton, 1 bushel of apples, 1 jar of honey. November 2nd, 1953. Tommy Watts. Trousers, patched, resized. No payment. Family in hardship. No payment. Agnes turned page after page. Hundreds of entries spanning 1953 through 1971. 18 years of sewing. Coats, dresses, shirts, trousers, quilts, curtains. Crafted for families who paid in eggs and apples and firewood, and sometimes paid nothing at all. Because beside those names, the seamstress had written no payment and sewn for them anyway. The seamstress. Agnes turned to the inside front cover. A name written in that same precise script. Iris Wren, seamstress. This is my work. Agnes closed the ledger, pressed it flat against her chest, and then the crying arrived. Not gentle, not quiet. The raw, ugly, full-body sobbing of a woman who had just discovered her mother inside a metal box and understood in one devastating flash that Iris hadn't left. She had been here, working, sewing, making clothes for people who couldn't afford them, for 18 years after she supposedly vanished. Her father hadn't said where. He hadn't said anything. The next thing Agnes pulled from that container wasn't fabric, wasn't ledgers. It was the reason Iris had hidden herself away, the reason she never came home. Behind the cot, pushed against the back wall of the container, Agnes found a second ledger, smaller, personal, not business records, a journal. She read it on her feet, because sitting down felt like surrender, and her body already knew what her mind hadn't caught up to yet. The first entry carried a date, September 1953, 1 month after Iris had gone. I'm writing this because no one will believe me if I only speak. Frank has told everyone I abandoned the family. He has told Agnes I chose to leave. The truth is, I was removed. He changed the locks. He told me if I tried to see Agnes, he would call the police and say I was unstable. He has friends at the station. They will believe him. They always believe him. Frank, Agnes's father. The man who raised her after Iris disappeared. The man who'd said 2 words, quote 7, and constructed an entire life on top of them. Agnes read faster now. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. I found this container at the rail yard, abandoned. I cleaned it. I brought my machine. I sew because it is what I know, and because the families in this town need clothes they cannot buy. I trade for food. I sleep here when I must. Mrs. Garvey at the church lets me wash in the basement on Tuesdays. I watch Agnes from the road sometimes. She walks to school at 7:45. She carries a blue lunchbox. She doesn't look for me. Frank has made sure of that. I made a dress for Agnes today. Blue flowers on white. The fabric she used to touch when she sat in my lap. Size 7. I cannot deliver it. I put it in the box with the others. Agnes stopped reading. The box with the others. She turned slowly, eyes finding the shelving behind her. The boxes she hadn't touched yet, pushed to the very back, buried behind bolts of fabric and finished garments. She pulled the first one down, lifted the lid. Dresses, small ones. Children's sizes. Each tagged, each sewn for Agnes. 7 of them. Sizes 7 through 13. 1 for every year from 1953 to 1959. Different fabrics. Same impossible precision. Same tag stitched in red thread, made for Agnes, never delivered, never worn. Folded with care, wrapped, stored in a box inside a shipping container that Iris had turned into a workshop. Because she'd been thrown from her own home and scraped from her own daughter's memory,
Agnes lifted the smallest dress, blue flowers on white. Size 7, and pressed it against her face. The fabric carried no scent. 72 years had stolen that. But the stitching held tight. The seams ran straight. The hem lay even. Sewn by hands that loved the girl they were making for, even knowing those hands would never dress her. Agnes sat on the metal floor with 7 dresses pooled across her lap and understood something that broke the architecture of her entire life. Everything had been built on a lie her father told when she was 7 years old. Her mother hadn't left. Her mother had been 18 feet from the edge of this town for 18 years. Sewing clothes for other people's children because she was forbidden to sew for her own. If you've ever learned that the story of your own life was written by someone who didn't want you knowing the truth, stay with me. Because what Agnes did with Iris's container didn't only reshape her world, it reached into the life of every family whose name appeared in that ledger. Agnes didn't move into the container. She did something else entirely. She drove to the church, found Pastor Elaine. Did the church know about my mother? Elaine's hands went still on the hymnals she'd been sorting. Mrs. Garvey let my mother wash in the basement. The church knew Iris was alive. Elaine lowered herself into a chair. My grandmother was Mrs. Garvey. She told me before she passed. Your mother came the week your father locked her out. She begged for help. My grandmother called the police. The police called your father. He told them Iris was mentally unwell. She wasn't. No. But in 1953, a husband's word was enough. Elaine paused. Your father threatened to pull the family donation if anyone reached out to you. Agnes stood perfectly still. 72 years of silence. Purchased with a church donation. 200 families in that ledger knew her mother was alive, and not a single one told a 7-year-old girl that her mother was stitching dresses for her 3 miles down the road. What do you want to do? I want to show them. The exhibition came together 2 weeks later in the church hall, because the church carried a debt it could never calculate, and this was the first installment. Agnes arranged the container's contents with her own hands. The sewing machine stood at the center, cleaned, oiled, needle still threaded. Fabric lined one wall. Finished garments hung along another. The ledger lay open on a reading stand, and 7 dresses swayed on a line, smallest to largest, blue flowers on white, made for Agnes, sizes 7 through 13. She opened the doors at 10 in the morning on a Saturday. The first person through was Alice Hearn, 83 years old. Alice found her name in the ledger, October 3rd, 1953. Winter coat, wool. Her hand flew to her mouth. Alice whispered. The Briggs family came. Tommy Watts's daughter came. Tom himself had passed in 2019. She found her father's name in the ledger. Trousers, patched, resized, no payment, and wept standing up. 87 people walked through that first day. Most were descendants of names written in the ledger. Some remembered Iris faintly, the way you remember a shape in a doorway. A woman at the edge of a parking lot your parents never explained. Some brought garments Iris had sewn, still tucked in closets, still whole. The stitching tight after 7 decades. And every single one of them stood before those 7 dresses and went silent. 7 dresses for a daughter who never wore them. Hung on a line like a timeline of childhood, measured in fabric and hope. Keith came without Brenda. He stood in the church hall, looked at the container's contents, looked at his mother, and his face did that thing faces do when shame and love crash into each other at full speed. It cracked slowly along fault lines he never knew existed. "Mom," he said, "I didn't know. Nobody knew. That was a point. I mean, about Brenda, about the house, about letting you let your wife push me out the same way my father pushed my mother out. Different words, same door." Keith flinched. Agnes watched him flinch and felt no satisfaction, just the tired recognition of a pattern. Men who loved women but lacked the spine to shield them from other people's cruelty. Agnes said she looked at her son. Keith left, came back Saturday, and the Saturday after that, each time without Brenda, each time carrying tools. He built shelves for the church hall, display cases for Iris's garments. He sanded the sewing machine's cabinet until the wood glowed. He framed those 7 dresses behind glass and mounted them on the wall with a plaque that read, quote, 17. The town paper ran a story. Then the regional paper picked it up. Then a textile museum in Nashville called. They wanted the sewing machine and 3 garments for a permanent exhibit on women's labor in post-war Appalachia. Agnes let them borrow the garments. She kept the machine. "That machine is my mother's hands," she told the curator. "You can borrow the clothes. The hands stay with me." She moved the machine to a small apartment the church helped her find. $650 a month, subsidized. 1 bedroom, a kitchen, and a living room where Iris's singer sat by the window in the morning light. Agnes didn't sew. She had never learned. Iris was gone before she could teach her. But every morning she sat beside the machine with her coffee, ran her fingers over the wheel, the needle plate, the tension dial, and felt something, a vibration, specific and low, the hum of a connection that had been severed by a lie and rebuilt by a metal box and 7 dresses that smelled like dust and thread, and the kind of love that sews in the dark because it cannot stop. On a Tuesday evening, Agnes opened Iris's journal to the last entry. Dated March 1971. The year the container was seized and impounded, though Iris couldn't have known that. "I am 61 now. My hands shake. The needle is harder to thread. Agnes is 25. I saw her last week walking into the hospital in a nurse's uniform. She looked like me, the jaw, the way she holds her shoulders. I wanted to call out. I didn't." Some doors, once closed, cannot be opened by the person who was locked out. They can only be opened from the inside. If Agnes ever finds this place, if she ever reads these words, I want her to know I didn't leave. I was here. I was always here. Every stitch was a letter I couldn't send. Every dress was a year I couldn't hold her. And the blue flowers on white? That was the first fabric she ever touched. Sitting in my lap, pressing her face against my hip. I remember. I never stopped remembering. Iris. Agnes closed the journal. She lifted her gaze to the sewing machine. Morning light rested on the wheel. The apartment was small. It was hers. The lock on the door answered to her hand and no one else's. "I found you, Mama," she whispered. 72 years late. But I found you. The machine gave no reply. Machines never do. But the light drifted across the needle plate the way light drifts across all things it touches, without opinion, without hurry, simply arriving the way it has always arrived. Whether someone stands there to witness it or not, Agnes stood there, and that was enough.